The first thing the typewriter ever wrote for me was my own death date. The keys slammed down in the middle of the night, while I stood frozen inside the abandoned townhouse, and each metallic strike echoed through the dark hall like a hammer against a coffin lid. When the final sentence appeared on the yellowed paper, I realized the machine already knew something terrible was waiting for me beneath London. I remember staring at the unfinished line as rain battered the broken windows around me. The paper read, "To the man who opened the floorboards on Blackwood Street, you still have 3 nights left before they find you." I should have walked away from that building immediately, but curiosity has always been the worst weakness of my life. 3 weeks earlier, I had been hired to catalogue furniture and antiques inside condemned properties, scheduled for demolition across East London. Most of the work was dull because the houses were filled with rotting mattresses, broken mirrors, and forgotten family belongings covered in dust. Blackwood Street seemed no different at first, though every worker refused to stay there after sunset. The townhouse stood between 2 abandoned buildings, with its windows boarded shut and strange scratches covering the front door. An elderly neighbor watched me unload my equipment that morning, and she whispered that the house had been empty since 1978, after a family disappeared without explanation. Before leaving, she warned me never to go near the basement because the walls beneath the house were older than London itself. I laughed nervously at her warning because I assumed she was another lonely old woman telling ghost stories to strangers. The inside of the townhouse smelled like wet wood and mildew, and every floor creaked beneath my boots, as though someone moved underneath me. While documenting the upstairs study, I discovered fresh sheets of paper scattered across the desk, despite the room being sealed for years. Every page contained incomplete letters addressed to people with birth dates decades in the future. One envelope was written to a woman supposedly born in 2041, and another mentioned a child who would vanish beside the River Thames in 2068. I initially believed somebody had planted the letters as part of an elaborate prank, yet the ink looked impossibly old. That night, I heard typing sounds echoing through the empty house after the electricity failed. The noise came slowly at first before growing frantic, like invisible hands smashing against metal keys in desperation. When I followed the sound upstairs, I found an antique black typewriter sitting in the center of the study, even though the desk had been empty earlier. A fresh page rested inside the machine, while the carriage moved on its own beneath the moonlight. The words forming across the paper were wet with ink, and I watched my own name appear letter by letter without anyone touching the keys. Deep down, I already knew the machine was not writing random stories because it was waiting specifically for me. I spent the next 2 days researching the history of the townhouse, while pretending everything was normal. Public records revealed the house once belonged to a writer named Edmund Vale, who vanished in 1911 after publishing bizarre claims about receiving messages from unborn people. Newspapers described him as insane, though several articles mentioned police finding hundreds of prophetic letters hidden inside the walls of his home. The deeper I investigated Edmund Vale, the stranger the details became. Witnesses claimed he stopped sleeping during his final months because he believed voices from the future spoke through his typewriter every night. According to one surviving interview, Vale warned reporters that certain futures were alive and searching for new bodies to inhabit. I returned to the townhouse after dark because obsession had already replaced my fear. The study door slowly creaked open before I touched it, and dozens of new letters littered the floor around the typewriter like dead leaves. Each page described disasters that had not happened yet, including train crashes, murders, and entire apartment fires across future London neighborhoods. One unfinished letter described a woman drowning inside a flooded underground station during the winter of 2032. Another mentioned children hearing whispers from sealed tunnels beneath the city before vanishing forever. Every prediction sounded horrifyingly detailed, and many pages ended abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted by something nearby. The typewriter suddenly began striking keys, while I stood beside it holding the papers in my shaking hands. A sentence slowly appeared that read, "The walls below are opening again." Seconds later, a violent knocking sound erupted beneath the wooden floorboards directly under my feet. I nearly ran from the house at that moment because the knocking sounded human. The noise repeated in uneven rhythms like trapped people desperately trying to escape from underground chambers buried beneath the building. When I pressed my ear against the floor, I heard faint voices whispering my name from somewhere deep below the foundation. That night, I brought a recorder into the study, hoping to capture evidence proving somebody was hiding inside the house. Instead, the playback revealed distorted voices speaking in reverse alongside the constant sound of typewriter keys. One voice eventually became clear enough for me to understand a single horrifying sentence that said, "He must finish the letters before they wake." I stopped sleeping properly after hearing the recording because nightmares invaded every moment of silence. I dreamed about endless underground corridors beneath London, filled with faceless figures sitting before typewriters, while black water dripped from the ceilings above them. Every figure turned toward me at the same moment, before whispering that my letter remained unfinished. The next evening, I discovered strange symbols carved underneath the antique machine. The markings matched ancient diagrams connected to occult societies operating beneath London during the late 19th century. Hidden beside the carvings was a map leading toward abandoned maintenance tunnels beneath the city. At that point, I genuinely did not know what to do. If you had discovered what I found that night, would you have kept investigating or walked away forever? I wish now that somebody had forced me to leave before I uncovered what waited underneath Blackwood Street. I followed the map into the tunnels 2 nights later, carrying only a flashlight and the recorder from the townhouse. The underground air smelled ancient and wet, and rusted pipes groaned above me, while distant knocking echoed through the darkness ahead. Every step deeper underground felt wrong, as though the tunnels themselves were alive and guiding me somewhere I should never reach. The map eventually led me toward a sealed iron door, hidden behind crumbling brick walls covered in symbols, identical to those on the typewriter. Fresh scratch marks covered the metal surface, and several old letters were scattered across the flooded floor nearby. Every envelope was addressed to children who had not been born yet. I opened one letter with trembling hands, while water dripped from the ceiling around me. The page described a boy disappearing during a school trip in 2049 after hearing voices beneath the London Underground. Near the bottom of the page, somebody had written, "The unwritten always return below." The iron door slowly opened before I touched it, releasing a freezing gust of air from the chamber beyond. Inside, hundreds of candles surrounded dozens of antique typewriters arranged in perfect circles across the stone floor. Shadow-like figures sat motionless before the machines, while unfinished letters fed endlessly through the rollers. At the center of the chamber stood Edmund Vale, though he looked exactly as he did in photographs from 1911. His skin appeared pale and stretched tight across his face, and black ink dripped slowly from his fingertips onto the floor beneath him. When he finally looked at me, I realized the figures surrounding him were not entirely human anymore. Vale explained that the typewriters did not predict the future, because they created possible futures from unwritten human lives. The entity beneath London fed upon people who had not yet been born, shaping their destinies through the letters produced inside the chamber. Every unfinished page represented a stolen future waiting to become real. Before I could escape, the shadow figures began typing violently in unison, while the walls around us trembled. The chamber filled with deafening metallic sounds as hundreds of pages spilled across the floor like snowfall. Then my own typewriter appeared beside Vale, already typing my final letter without anyone touching it. The page described my death beneath the tunnels exactly minutes before it was supposed to happen. I grabbed the burning candles nearby and hurled them across the chamber while the shadow figures screamed in distorted human voices. Flames spread rapidly through the ancient papers, and the underground room erupted into chaos around me. I ran through collapsing tunnels, while black smoke filled the air behind me. The screams of the shadow figures echoed beneath London as the chamber burned somewhere deep underground. Just before reaching the surface, I heard hundreds of typewriter keys striking one final sentence in perfect unison. I survived that night, though part of me never truly escaped those tunnels beneath Blackwood Street. The authorities blamed the fire on unstable gas lines, and nobody believed my story about the chamber hidden beneath the city. When demolition crews searched the ruins afterward, they found no evidence the underground room had ever existed. For months afterward, I woke every night hearing phantom typing sounds inside my apartment. Unfinished letters began appearing beneath my door, written in the same faded ink from the townhouse. Every envelope contained names of unborn people, alongside dates connected to future tragedies across London. I tried destroying every letter I received, but new ones always appeared by morning. Sometimes I found them tucked inside library books or resting on empty train seats beside me during late-night rides home. No matter how far I traveled, the letters always found their way back to me. Years have passed since the fire beneath Blackwood Street, yet the nightmares never stopped. I still dream about the shadow figures typing endlessly beneath London, while black water rises around their feet. Occasionally, I wake convinced someone is standing beside my bed, whispering unfinished sentences into the darkness. Last winter, I received another envelope with no return address. Inside was a single letter addressed to a child scheduled to be born in 2039, and the page described a future encounter with an antique typewriter hidden inside a ruined apartment building. At the bottom of the page, one final line had been typed in fresh black ink. It read, "The machine survived because the story was never meant to end." I stared at those words for hours, while listening to faint typing sounds echo somewhere inside my apartment walls. Then I realized the sound was coming from the room directly behind me. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Grave Nova Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you in the next nightmare.